Well, hello. Welcome to the Saved and Confused podcast. My name is Bobby Mitchell. I will be the host of the podcast for each episode. As far as I can tell, this is our inaugural episode. So, episode one of Saved and Confused podcast. I've invited my really good friend, Roy DeSilva, to join the podcast with me this morning. Roy's going to sit in a little bit different role today than what would be normal for the podcast. What I felt God tell me about episode one was that episode one was supposed to be me kind of telling my story and giving you guys sort of a background on who I am, where I came from, that sort of thing, because it tells why we're here at this point, beginning a podcast to start with. And so the reason that I've asked Roy along for the ride today is just to kind of keep the conversation moving and ask any questions that might be pertinent to the story. Roy and I have known each other for over a year. Roy lives in the Atlanta metro area. He and his wife, Dottie, are incredible people, and they are involved in several different ministries local to the Atlanta area, but also nationally and even internationally with their prayer ministry, deliverance ministry, those sorts of things. Roy and I got introduced probably last October, and went through prayer session together at that point, and God just really solidified our relationship and began a really kind of beautiful thing where I don't know that there's been many weeks that have passed in the last 52 or more that we haven't spoken at least once in that week. And so he's a dear friend of mine and my entire family, and a trusted friend, who in his own right has his own story. And I think we're going to get into that in a later episode of the podcast where we'll get to talk to Roy and just kind of hear his story and his testimony. So I just wanted to do a little bit of an introduction. This is going to look a little different than what the typical podcast will, because the first one out of the chute, we have a guest host, which is Roy DeSilva. So Roy, welcome. Thank you for agreeing to do this with me.
Hey, Bobby, I just can't say enough. Just love you and your family. And I love how you love the Lord and how he's calling you. And so that's what we want to hear about today. I'm just going to start it right off. Tell us about what's going on with you and the Lord.
Yeah. So thank you for that. So I will back up kind of all the way to the beginning of my story. I was born and raised in South Florida. I was in church from the time I was probably a week old, and we were of the church folks who, if the doors were open at church, we were there. So it was a Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night choir practice. The youth was probably doing something on a Friday or Saturday night, and we were involved. My father was Sunday school superintendent, so very involved in the church. My grandfather was, I don't even remember if they called them elders or deacons or what they called them in that church, but my whole family was involved. And so very thankful for that as a foundation from my childhood. Had a great parents, great family, like just nothing in the world to complain about. And so grew up in that environment, knew a lot about Jesus. It was a Pentecostal environment in my case. And so got to experience Holy Spirit. And so it was I think it was a well-rounded experience of who God was, who God is. But for me, and as I tell this story, here's one sort of disclaimer that I'll throw out here. As I tell my story, I don't want anybody to hear the church did this wrong, the church didn't do these things, the church. It's not my platform. It's not my intent to try and bash the church in any regard. Okay. My story is, this is what I perceived as I was going through the process of my life. Okay. And so growing up, I think I knew a lot about God, and I knew the Bible stories, and I knew, sort of the order that everything happened, Genesis, Exodus, I kind of knew where all of that was. What was missing for me that I didn't know and wouldn't know for years and years and years was a personal relationship with the God of the Bible. Okay. And so I managed to live a good portion of my life with this idea of you're supposed to love Jesus and you're supposed to do the right thing. And all of this stuff that you're supposed to do, which I think is still good teaching. But when it comes from a place that is separate from relationship with God, then all you're doing is doing it in your own strength, right? And so you're going to wear out eventually. And the temptations are going to overtake you at some point when you're just trying to do the heavy lifting in your own strength. And so that was sort of the story of my life as I, got older and moved out on my own. So I left South Florida when I was about 20 years old, went to a college over in East Tennessee, was there for about a year, so 2 semesters, and I was a musician, I was a drummer, and that was my whole life. That's what I wanted to do, that's what I wanted to be, that was what I was good at. And so the reason I went to school was to try to position myself to play drums in a band somewhere. And so it happened that I got an offer from a band in Nashville to come and audition. So I made the trip over and auditioned probably on a Saturday, and we just played. I didn't know any of their music. It was all original music, so I didn't know any of their music, but we just sat around and played and went back to East Tennessee. And it was probably a week or so later, I got a phone call saying, hey, if you want it, it's yours. We'd love to have you. And so at the end of that semester, I just packed up a little Honda Accord with the little bit of stuff I had in the dorm room, which wasn't much. I think, it was clothes and maybe a duffel bag and then all my drums. And so I packed up and moved to Nashville. I didn't know a soul in Nashville. I met my roommate as I'm moving into his apartment. He was a friend of a friend and had his own apartment that was a 2-bedroom apartment. He was like, yeah, I'll take somebody to share the rent, I didn't even know how I was going to pay rent. I didn't have a job lined up. I didn't, it was just, looking back on it, I don't know if it was crazy amount of faith or if it was just youthful exuberance, but I moved to Nashville, got a job, played in this band, did that for, I want to say maybe 3 or 4 years. We had a little bit of success back in the late 90s. Sony Music did a thing called the Battle of the Bands. It was a demo listen derby. So everybody would send their demos into Sony and they would, go through the demos and figure out, who moved on to the next round. Well, in 1998, our band won it. And so we were the 1998 Sony Demo Listen Derby Battle of the Bands champions. The big prize was studio time. So I want you to go in the studio. I want you to cut us 4 songs. You can go to any studio you want to. You can pick your producer. Just go and cut us 4 songs and send them back. And it was basically, they wanted to see if they wanted to make an album with us, right? And so we ended up in Memphis at House of Blues Studio with an incredible producer, Malcolm Springer, who's still a really good friend of mine to this day. We recorded a few songs. The contract with Sony amounted to, best of my recollection, amounted to basically a 6-month sort of first right of refusal sort of thing. So go cut these songs. We're gonna sign you for 6 months. If we like what we hear, then we'll sit down and do something else. And they ended up cutting us loose after we recorded those 4 songs. We got picked up by another record label who basically did the same thing with us. Hey, studio time, wherever you want to go cut us some more songs and let's just see what this amounts to. And so I think we ended up with 6 or 8 songs at the end of it. They didn't keep us on, but I got to tour around for a few years and play drums and that sort of thing. It was in that time that I met Kim, who is now my wife. And we met. It was, again, this is one of those, I was working as a waiter, I was working as a valet, and I was working as a doorman at a bar in Nashville because all of those jobs would allow for me at the drop of a hat to say, hey, we got a gig in, Evansville, Indiana that we've got to go play. I took jobs that I knew would be flexible with the schedule.
Right.
And so Kim and I met. It was, best of my recollection, it was April. We met and it was an instantaneous sort of, I knew, she worked for a travel agency in the accounting department for a large travel agency at the time. And so we had talked. She got to travel for like next to nothing. Like I think she paid a room cleaning fee and got plane tickets. And so we could go anywhere we wanted to go. And basically it just cost me my plane ticket. And so we knew that we wanted to be together and get married and do the whole thing. And we were actually talking very early on about, hey, we can do a destination wedding because of where you work. It can be really cool. You know, maybe we should start looking at what that looks like for next year. Well, the process sped up a little bit and we met in April. Kim found out she was pregnant Labor Day of that same year. We got married in November, had our first child, Taylor, in April, and then had our second child April the following year, Blaine. And so it was kind of just this whirlwind of, okay, we didn't date long. We didn't know a ton about each other before we were pregnant. We were married. We were a family. And so.
Well, Bobby, I'll just cut in real quick. It was all the Lord. You have amazing, if anyone ever gets to meet your children and your family, they're amazing. Just love them. Yeah.
That's very kind. That's very kind. Yeah. So, I agree. I think the Lord allows things to happen. And I have said a number of times that if it hadn't happened the way it happened, I would probably either be dead or in jail.
Right.
There's just the lifestyle that I was living, it wasn't conducive to a long life. And so I say all of that to just get us to the point where you understand that I had a lot of head knowledge about who God was and what the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do. And the lifestyle that I was living, I was convicted by the entire time I was living that lifestyle, but I didn't do anything about it. I didn't do anything about it. And so fast forward, we're a family. I got out of the music business and got into sales because I didn't have a degree. And now I have a family and a mortgage and I've got to pay the bills. And so I can talk to people. And so the smart thing for me to do is get into sales where I can make a little bit of money and support a family. And so I did that. Spent about 20 years total in sales of some sort, inside sales, outside sales, various products and services. One of those companies that I worked for every year had a kickoff that they did, sort of a pep rally / training, whatever, early in the year, usually, February, March timeframe. And it was out of town. It was in a different state for us. So we would travel to this thing, spend 2 or 3 days there doing the pep rally thing, and then come back. It was during one of these trips in 2015 that I went on the trip. There was a female who was flirtatious texting, and I responded in kind, flirtatious text messages back and forth.
Yeah.
Without realizing that my cell phone was attached, because it was an Apple device, it was attached to my iPad that was sitting at home in Tennessee on the end table. And so every one of those text messages were read by my wife. And I got a phone call the next morning, something to the effect of, you can stay there if you want to.
Yeah.
And I was just stunned, completely guilty.
Yeah.
Completely stunned. It was a very, very long ride back to Tennessee from that stop. Got home. It was later the next week. My office is about an hour away from where we live.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was driving to the office. I pull into the office. And as I pull into the office, I just break and I'm weeping.
Yeah.
It's one of those ugly cry, uncontrollable, with heaves and everything else.
Wow.
And I was crying too hard to get out of the car and go into the office. And I was crying too hard to back out of the parking space and drive away. And so I just sat there and I said, God, I have no right to ask you anything, any favors.
Yeah.
Everything that I'm experiencing right now, I'm experiencing by my own hand.
Why were you crying, Bobby? Well, why were you crying?
Well, it was, I didn't know if I was going to lose my family. I didn't know if my marriage was coming to an end. I didn't know, I was broken. I was just broken. And I was overcome with guilt and shame. And just, there wasn't a big enough rock for me to crawl under,
Yeah.
And so I just wept and I said, God, I don't have any right to ask you for favors. Everything that I'm experiencing, I've earned this. This is just desserts for my life.
Yeah.
But if you will really save me, whatever that means, because clearly I'm not, if I'm living this kind of lifestyle.
Trying to do it on your own. Right.
Yeah. If you'll really save me, whatever that means, and you'll save my marriage, my family.
Yeah.
I'll do anything you want me to do. I'll go anywhere you want me to go.
Yeah.
And my testimony is that he did that. It wasn't an overnight thing, wasn't an easy thing. It wasn't painless. It took a lot of, my wife is an incredibly strong person and an incredibly forgiving person. But it took a process and a period of time for us to kind of walk through the emotions of it, the betrayal of it, all of that stuff. It wasn't an easy thing.
Yeah.
But God was faithful in all of that. So that was in 2015. And what I tell people now is that experience in 2015 is what introduced me to the person of Jesus Christ. It's where my religion, my Christianity, my faith, whatever you want to call it, that's where it went from duty and tradition and religion into the infancy of relationship with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And so I left that company pretty immediately and went to work for another. This is where the story kind of gets a little comical after the fact. It wasn't comical at all as we were going through it. But it's kind of comical after the fact. I had a number of jobs from 2015 to 2020. And every one of those jobs, at some point, God would say to me, this isn't what I have for you. To which I would hear, it's time for you to find another job. And so I would just scramble and, okay, I can't stay here. I got to find the next, whatever the next thing is. So I would apply to this, get a job. Yeah. And so
I'm sure that's really easy to talk to your wife about too. Hey, I
told you she's very patient and kind and forgiving. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Maybe one day she'll agree to be on the podcast and tell her side of all of this.
I want to be on.
I don't know that I want to be on that one. I may have you just step in and host that one for me and I'll watch it. Yeah. Yeah. So, wow. So there was a period of 5 years that 8 months in, 10 months in, a year in, 2 years in, whatever. Here was this voice again. Hey, this isn't what I have for you. I was like, that's what he would say. This isn't what I have for you. I would still hear, I got to go find another job.
Yeah.
And it got to a place in 2020, actually 2019, I went to work for an insurance company, took all the classes. You have to be state certified.
Mm-hmm.
So I took all of the classes, went through the school, took the exam, passed the exam, went to work for an insurance company. It was probably September, October timeframe that I went to work for them. Took until like the end of December for them to issue my license. So now you can actually start talking to people about insurance,
right.
Which effectively began my on-the-job training with this insurance company. So up to that point, I had done a bunch of online classes and, learning the lingo and all of that sort of thing. So essentially January 1st, 2020, hit the ground running. Hey, we're in this office. There's people here you can ask questions of, but get on the phone, start calling people, ask to look at their insurance, see if you can save them some money, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Well, February of 2020 rolls around and COVID is here. And to which, if you remember back, there was 15 days to slow the curve, everybody go home.
Yeah.
People come in, they sanitize the offices, all of that stuff. We're just going to try to separate, isolate, and make sure we don't pass this thing around to one another. Well, so February turns into May of 2020. We're still not back in the office. And I'm on the job training, which to that point had just been doing online modules of, Like this insurance company had a wealth of training material, and I think I exhausted it. And so we get to May, they're paying me a salary. I've got benefits, and there's really no expectation on me at this point to do anything, right? I
Sure.
haven't been cut loose yet. And so
Right.
I hear that voice again. This isn't what I have. And I was like, you can be kidding me, like if there's ever a pretty good gig, that was a pretty good gig because I've got no expectation and I'm getting paid. And so I called my wife and I was like, you're not going to believe this, but God's saying it again. And this time he kind of doubled down on it. He said, this isn't what I have for you. And every day that you stay here after today, you're stealing from this company. So,
oh my gosh, wow.
So I need you to turn in your resignation immediately. So I type up this resignation letter.
Yeah.
Send it to my manager at the time. And I don't even know that he had time to read the resignation letter thoroughly before my phone was ringing.
Yeah.
And he was like, hey, what's going on? Like, this doesn't make any sense. I think, and we've never had the conversation, but just my thought was, I think he thought I was in trouble. I think he thought, I had some sort of gambling addiction or, some sort of something else was going on. Why would anybody leave this, right? Like, why would anybody resign under these circumstances?
Yeah.
And I said, listen, I just have to be honest with you. The only thing I can tell you is the truth. And the truth is God said this isn't what he has for me. And every day that I stay here after today, I'm stealing from this company.
Wow.
And he said, that's the only thing that you could have told me that makes any sense. And
Wow.
so
Yeah.
let me pray a prayer of blessing over you as you go.
Come on.
Yeah, it was incredible. And so I leave that job. We have some friends here in the Nashville area who are real estate brokers. And so I just thought, well, I'll give them a call. I'm sure they'll take me on. I'll go get my real estate license and I'll start selling real estate for our friends.
Yeah.
And Kim knew in an instant that wasn't the answer. And so she said, no, you're not doing that. That's not what we're supposed to do. You need to reach out to some people and get some godly counsel because this thing is happening over and over and over again. We've got to figure out what God is saying to you and what's going on, And so
just, and I don't want to interrupt your flow,
no, you're
but
good.
a couple of things come to mind.
Yeah.
And that is, number one, that your wife is a godly woman and that she's hearing things on your behalf and the Lord is speaking to her too. And, I know we talk so much, but maybe you could mention or just talk about how you're come to know the Lord's voice and know it's him speaking to you. And have you always known that? Or was that hard? Just talk about a little bit about that.
Yeah. Until 2015, I didn't know that. When I say my marriage crisis, my marriage almost coming to an end was the turning point. It was literally the turning the lights on point for me in my relationship with Jesus. And so, yeah, I don't know that I could go back before 2015 and give any example of, I thought God was speaking to me about this or speaking to me about that. And I'll tell you that from 2015 to the present, my ability to recognize that voice as God's voice has improved.
Yeah.
And so, he speaks to me all the time. And I'm able to recognize it. And just this is how it works for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'll hear what I believe to be the voice of God saying something to me. And the first place that I'll go is to Scripture to substantiate and confirm that word. If it's something totally different than what I read on the pages of Scripture, then I have to lean in a little harder because God doesn't contradict himself, And so I use Scripture as the foundation for everything in my life. And what God speaks to me, what he says to me should always be confirmed by that or confirm the word that I've read in Scripture. It can go both ways, but it should never contradict.
Exactly. Yes.
And so yeah, that is I hesitate to call it a skill. It's a gift, I think.
It's a tuning in, wouldn't you
Yeah.
say? You're just,
Yeah.
you hear the static and then,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So Kim at that point had said, "Hey, look, reach out and talk to some people because this isn't what's supposed to happen." And so I just opened my phone contacts and started scrolling through my phone contacts, and I was like, I don't know who to reach out to. I don't know where to make this phone call. And I happened across a guy who was on staff at the church that we attend. And he and I hadn't really had a ton of personal conversation or whatever up to this point, but I just reached out to him. I said, "Hey, look, I know this is going to be kind of out of the blue, but I'm just looking for some guidance, some direction." And so I just kind of told him, here's what happened in my marriage. I left that company for the last 5 years. This is what's happened. This isn't what I have for you. To which I would hear, it's time to go find a new job. And every place that I would go, I felt like a square peg in a round hole. I didn't fit. I couldn't succeed at the level that the people around me were succeeding at. I felt opposed. And I don't know what that means. And I don't know that you're going to have an answer for it, but I'm supposed to reach out and get some advice. And he said, as soon as you started talking, the thought that went through my mind was, why isn't this guy in ministry? And I was like, you are wrong. There's no way that that's what God is saying. I do not receive that. Any iteration of run as far and as fast as you can.
right.
That was my posture when I heard that. And so we got off the phone, and man, I'm telling you, it couldn't have been 5 minutes later. My phone rings, and it's another very trusted friend who has an incredible relationship with God. And she said, "What's going on?" And I told her the same thing.
What?
Square peg,
Wow.
round hole. God keeps telling me this isn't what I have for you.
Yeah.
To which I hear, it's time to find another job. And she was like, "Oh, no, you're running for ministry." And I was like, and fine. Not 2 in a row. Now I have to really sit and dig on this,
Yeah.
And it was true, man. It was true. So that initial period was God saying to not just me, but to Kim and myself, we got the same word, and it was, be still. And I thought, okay, be still. Okay, be still. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, I could probably hang out for a couple of weeks. This is kind of like a little vacation, and God can do whatever it is he's doing in this little period of rest and relaxation. And that 2 weeks turned into the last 4.5 years. So God took me out of the marketplace completely in May of 2020. And I have had one paying job since then, and that was a year ago. I cleaned a church that we attended twice a week for, $1,500 a month. And other than that, it's just been what he's done. He told me to be still. A later version of that from him was just be. And I struggled, man. I struggled with, how do you do that? Just be, how do you do that? Well, you don't do that. You are that. It just took a long time for me to get it through my head, what he was inviting me into and what he was doing.
Yeah.
And I will say this, I will say I had success in my sales career, and we had that we had set aside that had done very, very well. And so God sent that ahead. In my working years, he sent that ahead, and we were able to take drafts off of that 401k to supplement the income that Kim didn't make, to pay the bills. And our lifestyle hasn't changed. We didn't sell a house or downsize or sell cars or give blood or none of that was required because God had sent provision ahead of time for us.
So because I know your story and I know the fascinating aspect behind that, will you talk just a minute about what God told you about your K being your provision or him being provision?
Yeah. So yeah, that's a very recent sort of development as recent as this summer, the end of this summer. So yeah, The 401k that we had set aside was a sizable amount. It wasn't $1 million. It wasn't anything like that, but it was a sizable amount. And we would take disbursements off of that, sort of as needed, maybe a couple times a year, once a year, just as the bank account got a little low, we would replenish from that. And we were always faithful to give God credit for that. Okay, that he had sent that money ahead. He knew that this season of preparation for ministry, which is what this last 4.5 years has been, he knew that was coming, and that those funds were set aside to get us through this period of preparation for ministry with him. And so I really believe that we had been faithful anytime we brought that up in conversation to give him the credit and the glory for that provision. It wasn't ours. So fast forward to August, September of this year, and God said, hey, I want to talk to you about that 401k. You've always been faithful to give me credit and glory for sending that ahead for you. And that's good. It was very affirming that we had done the right thing there. He said, but here's the issue. If everything hit the fan tomorrow financially for you, your first call would be to that 401.
Yeah.
You would look to that as your provider, as your solution. And he said, I need to be the first place you call in every facet of your life. To which I felt a little scolded, because it was true. I mean, that is the truth, but I felt a little, that stings a little bit. And he said, so what I want you to do is I want you to liquidate that account. You want me to what? Yeah, I want you to liquidate that account. So that's another conversation with Kim. Again, you get the theme here that Kim is a very patient, loving, godly woman.
Yeah.
And so what he was doing was, he said, I want you to liquidate that account. Okay, God, well, what are we supposed to do with the money? Well, I'll show you. I'll show you what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Okay. So I made the call that day. If you've ever taken funds from a 401k, you're trading stock is what you're doing. You're buying and selling stock in a 401k. And so I had to make the phone call to it was Fidelity that managed our 401k. I had to make the phone call to say, hey, I want you to sell off all of the stock, send me whatever proceeds, hold out the taxes and the penalty and all that stuff. Send me whatever the balance is. Send it to this account, our bank account.
Yeah.
And so I did that immediately, so I didn't chicken out. I didn't want to give myself an out on that.
Yeah.
And we were certain that it was God telling us to do this. So
right.
All of this is not a recommendation for anybody else on how you ought to do your
That's
finances or anything else. This is just my story. This is what God has done in my life. And so we did that. The funds hit our account. We were made aware of a need in another country that still has what they call debtor's prison, that if you fall behind on your obligations, that they will come and lock you up. And, how are you supposed to pay your way out of that when you're behind bars? And so we were made aware of a situation in another country where that was the case for someone. And we knew that with the funds that we had just liquidated and closed our 401k, that we were supposed to tithe on that amount.
Yeah.
And so God directed us to use those tithes towards this guy who had a debt that he couldn't pay.
Yeah.
And the tithe amount, if we're strict tithers at 10%, didn't cover the guy's debt.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, okay, God, we'll do our part and we'll send our tithe, and maybe other people will chip in and, be able to cure this guy's debt. And God said, yeah, you're right. The tithe is supposed to go to this.
Yeah.
But you're supposed to make up the difference and not rely on somebody else to cure this debt. So there's tithes and there's offerings. And so you're going to do both in this situation. And it wasn't an astronomical amount of money that we sent. It wasn't tens of thousands of dollars or anything like that. to this guy, but it wasn't an insignificant amount of money that we sent to this guy either. It was thousands of dollars that we sent. And that's not to pat myself on the back. That's just to give sort of a benchmark baseline of, so people will understand this wasn't a $500 check we wrote. It wasn't a $20,000 check we wrote. It was somewhere between those two numbers.
Yeah.
And so immediately, okay, the wrestling of, all right, God, those are funds that were set aside to provide for us,
Right.
Those are, and so he was beginning to divorce us from our dependency on this fund and redirect our dependency to him. Right. And I'm just going to be honest with you. Anytime God wants to make those changes and remove an idol from your life, because that's what it was.
Yep.
It was an idol in our lives that we looked to, and we would have looked to before we went to God, because it was there. It was available. We'd get our hands on it. We knew the process.
Yeah.
So anytime God tries to divorce you from an idol, it's going to cost you something. It's going to hurt. It's going to be painful. You're going to feel the anxiety of that, the tension of that, even some stress around that. Like, all of those feelings are natural feelings to have in those moments. And we went through every one of them, and we went through some of them multiple times.
Right.
And I'll just tell you, so we sent this money to this guy. On the heels of that, Kim has had a dream for years to own her own business, and that business be a boutique, a clothing boutique. It's just always kind of floated around in the back of her mind, and she's voiced it like, I knew about it, our kids knew about it. It's just sort of this, bucket list sort of thing. Maybe someday God will let me have my own business. So we've liquidated the account. We've sent money overseas to a person we've never met.
Right.
And then
never met him.
Mm-mm. No.
Right.
I don't even know his last name.
Right.
And then God said, hey, that boutique you've been wanting, now's the time. I want you to open a boutique. We were like, what? Open a boutique? Like, God, you see where the finances are. Like, if we were going to do this, 4 years ago would have been a pretty good time, because we had a little more money we could have, and he's like, yeah, but it would have been you doing it.
Yeah.
And what I'm inviting you into is to allow me to do it. And so we made a big investment in inventory, and we got, a domain name registered and business license and all of that sort of, all of the things that you need. And we're not in a storefront. We're not in a brick and mortar location. We're, it's pop-up events here and there, but still a considerable investment to get that up and running. Right.
Yeah.
And we've had 3 events since this became a thing, and God blessed those events, and we did well financially on those events, and we're learning how to do this thing. He's just invited us to faith. He's just invited us to walk by faith. That's what it is.
Yes. Yeah.
On the heels of that, he says, hey, I had talked to you, Bobby, 8 or 9 months ago about this idea of a podcast. Now's the time to pull the trigger on that podcast. And I was like, Lord, the financial situation that we're in. I don't own a light or a microphone or anything necessary to make this thing happen. Yep. I want you to go purchase all of those things.
Yeah.
Lord, the finances, what's going on. Yeah. But I'm inviting you to do it, and I'm going to provide for it.
Exactly.
And so that's where we are. That's what this is. That's the invitation from God to do this, not as my thing, not as my idea even. I am so technically illiterate, it's not even funny. I do well to find the power button on a laptop. And so the cameras and the lights and where do I plug the cords into, and what does that look like, and software, and I am so overwhelmed by every single one of those details. And I had waited, God gave me this vision for a podcast probably 4 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I was waiting for God to send the people. Okay, I need somebody who is technical. I need somebody who understands websites and social media and
Yeah.
editing and, production, all of that. So when you send those people, then I will. And it was probably a week and a half ago that he said, today's the day. Get up, go buy the stuff. I don't just go buy the stuff. Okay, Lord, I don't even know what stuff to buy. Yes, you do. Go buy the stuff. Go buy the stuff. So Kim and I jumped in the car. She happened to have the day off that day. We jumped in the car. We went to Nashville, went to one spot. I bought the mic. I bought cables, interface stuff, whatever. I was asking the guy, what do I need to do this? Like, I have no idea the equipment, the gear involved. I thought I was going to have to get a mixing board with all the slides and multi-channel. And I had no idea, man. No idea.
Right.
But we went and we did it. Came home and got everything set up. And I'm still waiting. Okay, Lord, we've done what you've asked us to do. We went and bought all the gear. Now send me the people that know how to make this thing run,
Yeah. Yeah.
I woke up, was it maybe last Friday, the Friday before Christmas. So we're recording this on December 27th, by the way. The Friday before Christmas. And God said, I just need you to press record and start talking to people. Yeah. And I will send the people, and I will send the resource and the provision and everything else that you need. I will send it, but you have to begin to move. You have to begin to walk what you say you believe.
Yeah.
You have to begin to walk like you really believe it. If you really believe it, your walk will tell more than your mouth. And what your walk is currently telling people, if they're observant and they're watching you, is that you only kind of believe this. You only believe this with guardrails.
Well, so what I'll just speak over you is something that's you'll get there and everything about the polished and the technology and all those things. But you can have all of that perfect production, but if you don't have authenticity, if you don't have just speech that is truth, just truth. If you hide behind a mask, if you're scared, if you're fearful, because you haven't alluded to it, and those will come in the future, I'm sure, but there was stuff between you and your wife because she's working through her fears, you're working through your fears, and the Lord is in the middle of all that. But what I just declare over you is you've been faithful to do that work, and I've seen the Lord working you through all those things, freeing you from fear and anxiety and the idols and all that. And so that's why I love you as a friend, just because you're real and people don't have real. How many, if you just look at everything, we don't have the authentic, but the Lord is bringing that into fruition right now.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, by the way.
Yeah.
Your $20 is in the mail.
No.
No, seriously.
No.
Thank you. That's very honoring. So thank you for that. What I'll say, that leads me perfectly into kind of talking about the podcast and what it's supposed to be. So you teed that up very well. The podcast is about authenticity. The podcast is, what I want people to hear, maybe more than my story and the details of who I was and what God has done and who I am today. More than that, I think what I want people to hear and know is that I'm no expert on life. I'm no expert on Jesus. I'm no expert on faith, on hearing the voice of God. Like, this is not book learning. This is not institutional theory. I think it's difficult for people in a church setting to be completely authentic, to be completely vulnerable, to be completely transparent, because you're afraid of what people are going to think or what people are going to say. And listen, the enemy absolutely lied to every single person. That's all he does. That's who he is. He's the father of lies. Mm-hmm. And so he makes you believe you're the only one. You're the only one with these questions. You're the only one that feels like this. You're the only one who doesn't get it. And look at all these other people around you. They get it and they're on the right track. And here you are over in the corner questioning everything. That's not true. And so what I believe God has invited us to through this podcast is to be a place where we can have people on to tell stories just like I have. I've told you my story. And it's not coming from somebody, the big visual, and this will probably be repeated a million times on this podcast, because it's just, to me, maybe the most powerful sort of metaphor or imagery behind what it is that God is doing with this podcast. And that is the scene of a river crossing. And it's not a small river. It's a huge river. And you're going from one side of the river to the other, and you're getting into a canoe to make this crossing, right? And there's this huge fog bank that's descended over the river. So you can't even see the other side. You can't see your destination, right?
Yeah.
What I want people to understand is I am not a guy who has made that crossing and is standing on the other shore shouting back at you how to get here. That's not me. I'm the guy in the next canoe paddling toward that shore right alongside you. I haven't arrived anywhere, but I just believe God's calling me in that direction. And in order for me to get from here to there, I have to just trust that He is calling me in that direction, and that every step of the way, every oar stroke, every paddle in the water is directed by Him, is guided by Him, is provided for by Him, is beckoned by Him. Stroke. So I don't want anybody to get the idea that this is, I think I'm a know-it-all, or, I'm the final authority on all things related to faith and the voice of the Lord and obedience and brutal honesty with God. That's not it. I'm just here to tell you what that's looked like in my life.
Yeah.
And I want to invite other people to sit in the chair and tell their story of what it's looked like in their life, for the singular purpose of encouragement. To let you know.
Lord, I was just going to say, that's all the Lord asks us to do, is to testify. We overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony.
That's right.
And you're just sharing your testimony of how He's
working. And providing a platform for others to do the same.
Yeah.
And so to bring other people in, what I think is going to happen, prayerfully, what I pray will happen, and the vision that I believe God has given me for what will happen through this podcast, is that as people tune in to hear each episode, they're going to hear a little bit of their story in the stories that are told on this podcast. And they're going to realize, man, I'm not the only one. And I'm not the only one who's thought this, or who's questioned this, or who's struggled with this spot or reality or whatever. And so the encouragement that comes from knowing you're not alone, and then hearing where God has brought other people through. Again, you're not going to hear from anybody who's arrived, right? But we're all in different spots along the journey, and we can testify to what we've seen God do, and where we've seen God be faithful, and where we've heard His voice, and where He's invited us to just tell Him the honest, ugly truth about what it is that we believe. I think there's some things that God's been speaking to me in the last several days around your life is evidence of what you really believe. The way you walk your life out, what you do, what you say, the attitudes you carry, it's evidence of what you truly believe to be true in your life. Not that it might be true, but it is true. And so what are we showing people that we believe is true in our lives? And so God is speaking to me around the idea of being completely, vulnerably honest with Him when it comes to what I believe about Him, what I believe about me, and what I believe about other people. God, this is what I really believe. Maybe it doesn't match up with your word or what's true from you, but today this is what I believe. So it's the things that we believe that may or may not be true, right?
Right.
And then It's the things that we don't yet believe that are definitely true.
Right.
And we exist in the gap between what may or may not be true and what is definitely true. We're somewhere in between on a million different topics as it relates to our lives, right? And I think when we're willing to be honest with God about where we stand in that gap between what we believe is true that might not be and what we don't yet believe is true that definitely is, that's where he meets us and he's able to shine his light of truth on the lie that the enemy has told us. And then we have the option to either continue to believe the lie or to begin to believe his truth.
Yeah.
And that's what this life of, if you're in religious circles, you've heard it called sanctification or the refinement or the becoming more like Jesus, like whatever language you want to put to that. It's where Jesus becomes very, very real and you become very intimately acquainted with who he is in that space. And I think that's what he's inviting people into, is to be authentic in that space. Tell him what you really believe, even if it's something maybe you don't think you should believe. Maybe if it's something you think, maybe I ought to be ashamed that I believe that. Like whatever the case, there's no shame. There's no condemnation when you bring it to Jesus and just say, hey, what do you want me to know about this?
Yeah.
And then allow him the opportunity to just, again, shine his light of, this is what is true. Shine his light of truth. And then you have the option to either grab hold of that or not.
Right. Bobby, what's something that you confess to the Lord? What's a truth that what's one you'd want to share today anyway?
I think the one that we're in the middle of right now is, the 401k is depleted, like that money is that we've been relying on for the last 4.5 years. It's not there anymore. And so, okay, God, like we really believe that you're calling us into business. We believe you're calling us into this podcast.
Yeah.
And like he keeps bringing back to mind, the Old Testament figures like Abraham and Moses and Noah. And, none of those people had guarantees. None of those people were shown 10 miles down the road before they took their first step. And they're all listed in that hall of faith, that Hebrews hall of faith and so I just believe that God is calling us to a faith that looks radically different than what we see presented to us.
Amen.
And it shouldn't be radical to believers because you've got an entire book, the Bible, that goes through this example and that example and this example of people who just embrace that life of faith. But for some reason in the 21st century, we don't live that way. And so his invitation to Kim and I has been, if you will, I will. If you will step out and walk this thing out by faith, I will be there and I'll catch you and I'll provide for you and I'll protect you, but it won't look like the people around you.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I feel like part of the you're tuning in to hearing from the Lord. We say speaks to us, but he communicates with us. We encounter him. And so this happens. And I know this because you share this with me all the time. He does that in different ways. Maybe in your journaling, it matches up with your Kim's. And you guys have not spoken. You haven't. But here's your journal. Here's her journal. Language is similar. Concepts are similar. And then I know, and I just speak that out too, that through opportunities that don't make any sense at all, and affirmations through people, through opportunities that happen or don't happen, or he just speaks to us through all those different ways.
The challenge is to, in a very real way, this isn't Christian language. This isn't, in a very real way, what I know he is asking of Kim and I is, will you risk taking me at my word? will you risk that what I have said to you, I will do? Will you risk that what I say to you about who I am and what I've called you to, will you risk that it's true? And so, man, this isn't a plea for sympathy or anything else. I don't want anybody to hear that in my voice. I'm just telling you, we are fully exposed and at the mercy of his word being true. And that's a vulnerable place to be. We feel that vulnerability, but it's also I believe it's the only place to experience God being God is to be willing to expose yourself and just trust that his word is true. And we're in a very real sense, we're in a spot where if he doesn't do what only he can do, we're ruined,
That's beautiful.
We're ruined. It's beautiful, it's terrifying, but the truth, like I'm not shying away from the fact that we have moments throughout the week where we're like, we feel the pressure of being exposed and we feel the pressure of the vulnerability. Not that we controlled anything before, but the illusion of control was there, and the illusion's not even
right. But how many times in the Bible? How many different stories in the Bible?
Yeah. Well, and I think if you're a believer, right? If you are a believer in Jesus, we crave the miraculous in our lives. We want to see people healed. We want to see people delivered. We want to see people raised from the dead. We want to see miraculous provision and restoration of families and, the addict being cured and reunited with their family, the redemption that God offered. Like, we want to see all of that stuff because it builds our faith. It builds our hope that if he'll do it for them, he'll do it for me. We want to see all of that stuff. And I'm just confessing from my mouth, I have historically in my life been very hesitant to put myself in a position where I needed God to come through for me. Right. And that's the invitation that again, thank God for a godly wife in Kim, who beside me is willing to just say, okay, Lord, if you don't, our situation. And either God is God or he's not. That's really what we're getting to. Either he is who he says he is, or he's not who he says he is. I would never put myself in this position if I didn't fully believe that it was God calling. And so we have to, if you believe that God has called you to this spot, then you have to behave in a way that's consistent with what you say you believe. And I think that's
right. It's scary.
Yeah. Moment by moment, it's terrifying. And then, you mentioned the journaling. Man, that's a discipline that we've learned really to a huge extent. We've learned it just this year. And it is sitting down and just telling God what's on your mind, what's the truth about what you're thinking and what you're feeling. And so I try to do it 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I try to sit down first thing in the morning and just have some time with God to just, okay, Lord, here's what's on my mind. Here's what's on my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And then ask him, what do you want to say to me about that? What do you want me to know about that? And then just pause and allow him the opportunity to just speak to me. And I write it down. I write it down like a court reporter. Once I ask him the question, what do you want me to know? Then I kind of turn my brain off and just try to get the quote right,
Yeah.
God, what do you want me to know? And then I'm not trying to think through and finish his sentence for him or, lead him down a certain path. And I just put pen to paper and write word by word what I believe I hear him say. And you alluded to it earlier that we have had many, not a few, not rare. Kim and I have had many instances where she's away at her office at work. I'm here in the house. We've journaled. I've sent mine to her. She's sent hers to me, and I read hers. And there are phrases that have been word for word. Word for word.
Right.
There have been concepts or context that has been identical. I've got you. I'm providing for you. Rest. Don't delay. Like, I can go phrase by phrase where she's written it 20 miles away from where I am. We've had no discussion about it whatsoever.
Right.
And God uses that to confirm to her and to I that
Right.
he's saying the same thing to both of us. And so here's another opportunity. Will you drop the worry and just trust me? Will you
Yeah.
just trust me? Here's your invitation, and here's the confirmation that I'm using to show you I'm speaking to both of you this same thing. And so will you just trust me that this is me speaking and that I'll handle all the details?
Yeah. So it sounds like the two-part thing. I want you to trust me, and I will talk to you along the way. It sounds like maybe something you would do with a little kid who was fearful about learning to swim or.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the other part, I think the third part is the willingness to be brutally honest with God about what what's really going on, what you really think, what you really feel. You're not going to offend him. You're not going to chase him away. He's not going to zap you with a lightning bolt. You know, he invites us to worship him in spirit and in truth. And sometimes the truth is ugly. Sometimes the truth is something you don't want to say out loud in front of a group of people. And that's okay, but you can always say the truth to God and ask him what he wants you to know about that. When I first really started leaning into, okay, this is the voice of God and I can trust that this is the voice of God, the questions that I think all of us start to ask initially start with why. God, why this? Why not that? You know, I prayed and prayed and prayed. Why didn't you answer that prayer? Or, you know, and those are legitimate questions, right? But I think that question's too big because I think everything is so interconnected that a question about why involves so many different moving parts that if he decided to download that answer to that question, it'd blow your mind.
Yeah.
It'd blow your mind. So what I learned, what I was taught, Jamie and Donna Winship, if you don't know who they are, they have a really good ministry that teaches how to hear from God. And so I learned a lot of that understanding came through kind of pouring into some of their material. And so what I learned to ask was not why, but what do you want me to know about it? And if you think through your situation, you know, the why question, you can also ask, what do you want me to know about it in place of a why? You know, God, I prayed this and what I wanted to happen didn't happen.
Yeah.
Instead of inserting why, you can insert, what do you want me to know about that? God will always answer what he wants you to know because it's what he wants you to know. You know, and so you can ask that, what do you want me to know question about anything in your life, and then just get quiet. And when I say God talks to me, it's not a booming voice, you know, it's not Charlton Heston, you know, crossing the Red Sea. It's not that kind of thing. It's, you know, for some people, it is sort of an inner voice, you know, and maybe you've called it your conscience or whatever. Like for some people, it is a voice. For some people, it's just a knowing. Like, I asked this question and I didn't necessarily hear anything, but I just have this understanding that I didn't have 10 seconds ago when I asked this question.
Yep.
For some people, it's I sense this. I've asked this question and now I feel like this is the answer. Or lean into all of that. God, you were absolutely correct. God communicates with us, but he doesn't necessarily talk to everybody in the exact same way. And so be open to all of your senses. Some people dream dreams. Some people see visions. Some people just have this understanding, this knowing. Some people sense, you know, a shift or a thought or an idea comes to mind that wasn't there 30 seconds. Just trust him and ask him again. Is this from you? What do you want me to know about this? Is this? And the more that you do that, it's like exercising a muscle, man. It really is. When I first started this, it was almost I don't really know what I think about this. You know, I don't
I mean,
know.
I remember
I know where you're
You
going.
were all about, anyway, you were all about very skeptical.
Very skeptical, very skeptical. And I think that's okay. God takes you where you are, right? Like
Yeah.
he's not offended that you don't want to be fooled. He's not offended that you don't want to believe something that's not him. Okay. So ask for confirmation, you know?
Yeah.
And so when I first started kind of leaning into this, it was very tentative. All right, Lord, the first freaky thing that happens in this thing, I'm running the other directions.
Yeah. Didn't you? Because I believe you had a fear of being duped, a fear of being misled. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a common fear that a lot of people
course.
have is,
course.
you know, because it is so antithetical to the way this world lives their life. It looks completely opposite. It looks ridiculous to
Right.
everybody in the world.
Right.
And the Bible tells us that God calls us a peculiar people. It's not because we're a bunch of weirdos. It's because we're going to do, if we're following him, it's going to look different. You know, the verse that keeps coming to mind is that Romans 12:2. It's the no longer conform to the patterns of this world, the way the world does everything, right?
Yeah.
No longer conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed. How? By the renewing of your mind.
Yeah.
So think differently. And that thinking differently isn't an exercise of grit your teeth and furrow your brow and maybe you'll get there. It's a, hey, God, if I'm going to think about this differently, you're going to have to give me the thoughts that I'm supposed to think because I've been conditioned for the last 50 years to do things this way, to think things this way, to see things in this light. My whole conditioning, our culture, our environment, our educational system, our political system, our economic system, all of this stuff points me in a very specific direction that everybody else is running in that same direction. And so if I'm not going to be conformed to those patterns, you have to give me that fresh idea, that new way of thinking, that different understanding.
Yeah.
And I think that's where he's leading all of us. And it's look, this is not a path for cowards. This is not a path for cowards because this is a difficult thing to divorce yourself from everything that you thought was true before.
So that the heroes of faith in Hebrews, those guys didn't get in there through easy stuff.
No, and they didn't get in there through their own intellect and their own understanding and their own creativity. And like they didn't do all they did. And you can go back and read it yourself. And if you want to have conversations about this, like we can chop this up. I love having these conversations. But go back and look. All they did was obey.
Yeah.
They didn't come up with the idea on their own. Okay, I'm going to go build a boat. I'm going to build an ark. Well, what's an ark? You know?
Yeah.
It hadn't rained. They didn't have any idea what an ark was. So he didn't think of that on his own.
Yeah.
He just
I would even parse it up even just a little bit more and just say the very first step is not trying to solve the problem on your own, not turning to your FK or not seeking,
not leaning on your own understanding
by sight. Our solution as Christians is we pray. We seek the Lord first, which doesn't make any sense to the world.
And this is going to sound a little challenging maybe, and I'm not doing it for that effect, but that sounds even different to a lot of Christians. So
right. Yeah.
You know, how much of the world has seeped into the church when we're afraid when most of what we do looks identical to the people who don't go to church, you know? When most of what we do and where we go and what we say and how we say it and the things that we are so stressed out about and worried about, and when all of that we have in common with the people that don't go to church, I mean, that's a question to be asked. I'm not pronouncing judgment. No. I'm just saying.
And we came from there. You and I both came from there.
Yeah.
We came from there.
Yeah. My whole life until 2015, so almost 10 years ago, my whole life I had a lot of head knowledge about God. I had a lot of Bible stories that I knew how they went, but I had no personal relationship with that God.
Right.
And so in the heat of battle, in the heat of temptation, in the heat of whatever, I didn't have anything to grab hold of except the stuff that I was supposed to believe and the stuff
Yeah.
that I was supposed to do the right way. And, you know,
I do.
and the introduction of relationship with Jesus and I'm not saying it was never talked about before then. I'm not blaming anybody for anything. I'm just saying this was my path.
Yep.
That 2015 was the introduction for me to Jesus Christ. And it's been a journey. It has been this, what I tell people is I am more the man that God created me to be today than I've ever been in my life. And it's
Right.
not from a process of addition. It's not a process of multiplication. It's mostly been a process of subtraction. It's been the things that I thought were true that aren't, the
Correct.
things that I believed that motivate my life in a specific direction that now I've realized was just deception, you know? And so again, the journey for me, I don't think is that radically different than the journey that every one of us is on. I think what this podcast is supposed to be is an opportunity, a place where people can come and hear people having conversations
Yeah.
about what it looks like to change the way you think, to surrender
Yeah. Yeah.
the idea that I know what's best for me and grab hold of the idea that God knows what's best for me. And if I'm just daring enough to believe that what he says is true,
Yeah.
there's some pretty incredible stuff for us.
Well, so Bobby, how's your family different now that you're doing it different?
Man, everything is different. Everything is different. Again, listen, we're not the perfect family. We're not the perfect people. We're not a perfect ministry, or there's nothing about us that's perfect. But I can tell you that the pattern of our lives is in a trajectory that points towards Jesus, where the pattern of our lives for me before 2015 was a pattern that pointed to anything but. And so that's what I mean when I say your actions, your attitudes, your words, they tell people what you believe without you speaking anything. That's the fruit. The Bible talks about the fruit. You'll know it by its fruit. You'll know them by their fruit, right?
Yeah.
And the fruit you don't start with the fruit in mind. You start with a relationship with Jesus and getting to know him and letting him speak to you and letting him reveal things to you that he wants to address with you. And when you do that one-on-one with Jesus, fruit appears. When you start with the fruit in mind, then all it is behavior modification, and you will not sustain that. I couldn't. I didn't. And I grew up in a great household with great parents who loved Jesus, who taught me about Jesus, who took me to church. Like, I had every advantage in life to really have a dynamic relationship with God. I really did.
Yeah.
But I didn't have that dynamic relationship until 10 years ago. And so it's not the environment necessarily. It's like, I've made the comment before, I'm not a hall monitor. God didn't call me to be his elementary school hall monitor. Quit running. You're not supposed to be chewing gum. Let me see your hall pass. Like, none of that. He didn't call me to do that. He didn't call me to judge people that way.
Yeah.
What he called me to do, just like he did Peter, Lord, if it really is you, call me out on the water with you.
Yeah.
Okay, come on.
Yeah.
And as long as Peter's eyes were locked on Jesus' eyes, Peter was doing something that only Jesus had ever done. No other human being in history had ever walked on water.
Yeah.
And so here's the invitation from Jesus. Come on, step out of the boat. And as long as Peter's gaze was locked on Jesus, Peter was doing what only Jesus had done. It wasn't until Peter began to look around and see his circumstances, see the situation, that he began to sink. And so
Right.
I think that's the same call that Jesus has for every single one of us is lock eyes with me, step out of the boat, and you'll do things that will amaze you and everybody else. And out of your periphery,
Yeah.
you will see things that
Yeah.
there's no explanation for except Jesus.
Accept it. And that's how he wants it. That's what the
Yeah.
Bible says.
Yep.
He doesn't want others to get credit.
Yeah. He's going to
Because,
do it his way so that he's the only one that can get credit for it.
yeah.
That's exactly right. It's exactly right.
Well, so I've heard you've told me about um, addressing or living life from a position of overflowing, that the Lord has filled you or fills you. And then it's out of the overflow. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So what I think you're talking about there is this idea that, especially people who are ministry minded, maybe more so than marketplace minded, but
Right.
people who are more specifically ministry minded, a lot of times our motivation is I'm going to go do this thing or whatever to help these people to I'm going to go give to people. And what God has shown me is his focus is those people. My focus needs to be him. And so to the extent that I am able to lock eyes with Jesus, just like
Right.
Peter out of the boat, to the extent that I'm able to lock eyes with Jesus and just work on my relationship with him. Okay, Lord, what do you want me to know today? What is it that you want to shine your light on in my life that is not true? What are you asking me to let go of, right? A lie,
Right.
deception, a half-truth, a distortion, whatever it is that's separating me from you, right?
Yeah.
It could be an attitude, it could be a thought, it could be a belief, it could be a million different things. But what is it, Lord, that you want to put your finger on in my life today? And if I'm willing to just work with him on that thing, okay, Lord, show me what's truth. If I'm believing a lie, show me what's true. And then give me the courage to grab hold of the truth that you're exposing. From that place, ministry overflows. And as you walk through this life and you bump into people at the mall or at the office or at the ball game or as I bump into people, what spills out of me is Jesus, because I've had this singular focus of God, just you and me, fix me. I'm as broken as anybody. The speck in my eye is a log. It's not a speck. Help me, fix me, help me.
Yeah.
And then I can turn around and have conversations in an environment like this that isn't focused at fixing Roy. It's focused on telling what God has fixed in me. And maybe there's something in that resonates with Roy.
From our conversations, there always is.
Yeah. But I think that's what this platform is going to be for however many people will find us, right? And the hope is that you will tune into this and just allow God to expose in your life through the stories that other people tell. Hey, maybe I have the same disbelief. Maybe I have the same wrong idea. Maybe I have the same tendency or what, and just allow God to highlight those areas with you, and then simply go ask him, Lord, what do you want me to know about it? What's true about that in my life? It's not me telling you, fix this, do this differently, believe this differently. You're not coming here to hear me tell you anything about you. My endeavor in this is to always point people directly to Jesus. You don't need a mediator.
He said, you don't need a mediator.
Yeah.
And he is the source.
That's right.
He's the great healer. He's the great physician, physically and spiritually and emotionally. Yeah.
And just the willing, he tells us if we will just seek him, if we'll just knock, if we'll just ask, then he will answer and he will open, right? And so really all he wants from us is our willingness to hear from him.
Yeah, and I think these testimonies are what did that knock look like? What did that seek look like? And where did those lies come from? He reveals all that stuff. Why do I believe that? And what is the truth? And he helps fix all those. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what God does with this, but what's beautiful to me is, this is our first episode doing a podcast like this, but this is
Sure.
not
Yeah.
this is not the first conversations that I've had like this. It's just
Okay.
the first conversations where I've pressed record, on conversations like this. And what's been beautiful to me is in the conversations that God's allowed me to have with individuals, he shows up for those people, but he also reveals things to me that draw me closer to him. It's always mutually beneficial to sit
Yeah.
down and have
Beautiful.
open, transparent conversations about our testimony. It's funny, the word is history. It's his story.
Yeah.
And it's his story as it applies to my life.
Right.
And so he's walking me through his story, and then he's asking me to turn around and go testify about what I know. He's not asking me to go out and teach Bible stories. He's not asking me to go out and teach theology. He's not asking me to go out. He's asking me to go tell just like the guy that was overrun with demons in the cemetery, just go tell him what the Lord has done for you.
Yeah.
What have you witnessed him do?
Right. Right.
I think we've gotten away from that to a large degree.
Yeah.
In our church services and even in some of our small groups and things like that, we've just lost the focus of that.
Right.
And I think he is inviting us back to those sorts of community testimony, sort of, hey, I was dealing with this and this is what God showed me.
Yeah.
Now the freedom that I'm experiencing, I've never experienced before in my life. And that's the truth. That's what happens. That's just what happened. And anybody who knows me, I'm going to invite people to the podcast through my Facebook page. There's 500 people there who have had some sort of relationship with me over the years. Any number of those people seeing something like this will tell you that's not the person that I knew 5 years ago. It's not the conversations that guy had. It's not, like what, and that's not to my credit at all. I'm just as well as I know how. I'm just trying to trust him more. I'm just trying to take him at his word and believe that what he says, he'll actually do. And I've placed myself in a position where it's necessary for him to do what it is that he said he's going to do, because I don't have a plan B or a backup and all of the plan Bs and all of the backups that I had, he's asked me to lay them down and walk away from them.
Is that because he's asked you to rest and be still?
That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
And it's that, I've heard people very recently, I had a conversation with a guy and the topic of this podcast came up and he said, okay, so what's your plan? Like, what's your business plan? What's your, how are you going to make a living doing this? How are you going to provide for your family doing this? And one of the comments that he made during that conversation, and this isn't to wag a finger at that guy or anything else, he's not the only one that believes this. And I believed it for years of my life.
Yeah.
His comment was, I have to work like it all depends on me. And I have to trust like it all depends on him. And I thought, that's different than the invitation God's given me. Because it sounds like striving.
It does.
It sounds like all of the weight of it's on me. And if God feels like it, he can lend a hand, but I've got to go out and listen, I'm not saying you shouldn't be diligent. You shouldn't work hard. There is specific blessing in the Bible for those things. So I'm not talking against that, but if that's the center of your motivation forward, then your motivation is centered in the wrong place. Because God invites us to rest. God invites us to be still and know you're not going to have to fight in this battle. I'm going to fight this battle for you. Like, it's repeated over and over and over in Scripture that he wants to show himself faithful in our lives. We are, to a large degree, just unwilling to put ourselves in a position where he needs to show himself faithful. And so he'll let us continue to bang our head against the wall and strive and stress and worry and all of the physical implications that has on our health and our lifespan and, quality of life and all of that stuff. It's a direct result, I believe.
It is.
In the fact that we have bought into these patterns and systems of this world, what the world tells us we need to do. It's competition. It's, you got to go kill it and drag it to the cave, and you got to go get what's yours because nobody else is going to give it to you. That whole attitude. And again, I'm not promoting laziness. I'm not promoting sloth. But what I'm suggesting is, why don't you get your instructions for the day from him and let him tell you what he's asking you to know, and then what is he inviting you to do?
I mean, what comes to mind is just Jericho. Those were pretty unique instructions he gave them.
Yeah. One of the stories that he keeps taking me back to, and it's fascinating to me. I love David. I love King David. I love the shepherd boy David. All things David in the Bible. That character in the Bible is one that I've been drawn to since I was a child, right? And so there's this story where David is king, and they're in this valley, and the Philistines are coming. They're going to make war with the Philistines. And David, by this point, is an accomplished military man. He's a general. He has all the strategy, the technique. His men are fierce fighters. He's trained them like they are SEAL Team 6 as far as we're concerned. Yeah. These guys are the elite, right? And David, instead of just rushing into battle, David prays. And he says, all right, Lord, are you going to deliver them into my hand?
Right.
And the Lord says, yes, go out and fight. The battle is yours, right? So they go out and they fight. They slaughter the Philistines in this valley. Well, verse or two later in that same chapter, they're back in the same valley against the same Philistine army coming. They're wanting to fight them again. Yeah. And so David has just literally a verse or two earlier has just won this incredible battle against the Philistines. The same war is repeating itself in the same location. And so David, I'm sure, would have been tempted to just do what he did last time because it was such a resounding defeat, right? But what he does is he goes back and he prays and he says, God, are you going to deliver them into my hands? And he said, yeah, this time I want you to go around this way. And when you hear the sound of an army marching in the treetops, come out and I'm going to deliver them into your hand. Yeah. Why is that so fascinating to me? It's because David didn't assume he knew the answer. He went and made sure he got the answer. Yeah. That's it. And I think that's the same. If you want to use the word expectation, I hate to use that word when it's related to God, that he has expectations of us. But if you want to use the word expectation, I think that is the invitation, at least, of God. I think invitation is a good one. Yeah. Come to me early in the morning and let me give you the instructions for your day. And don't assume that just because you've seen this before that it's going to play out the exact same way it played out last time. And so I lean on that story a lot in my life. And again, this isn't coming from an expert and a guy that's got it all figured out and, doesn't struggle and doesn't have bad days and doesn't question God. And none of that is true. Right. I'm just the guy in the next canoe, right? I'm just a guy a boat over from you, paddling in the same direction. But it's given me hope. And it's given me sort of guardrails that say if King David needed to go and ask God how to fight a battle, then I probably ought to wake up every morning and ask God, okay, what's on the agenda today? And what do you want me to know about it? Yeah. And the second question is equally important. What do you want me to know today? And then because of that, whatever that answer is, right? Whatever God says, here's what I want you to know. Then ask him, what are you inviting me to do? In light of that information, what are you inviting me to do? It's been said another way. What do you want me to know? And then what do you want me to do? I don't think God sends us to do things for him. I think he always invites us to do things with him. So that's why I'm not a huge fan of what do you want me to do as
Yeah.
much as I'm a fan of what are you inviting me to do with you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And he will answer those questions for you because it's what he wants you to do. It's what he wants you to know. He's not going to ignore you.
Right. He says, knock. Here I am standing at the door and knock. If anyone invites me in, I will come in and eat with them and they with me. He wants us to open the door to him.
And he tells us, we are sheep throughout scripture is right? Like that's the image of the believer, of the body of Christ, of this church. We're related to sheep. And he says, my sheep know my voice.
Right.
And they listen to me. Right. And so again, man, this is not a PhD course that I have completed, and I'm speaking to you out of all of this head knowledge. I believe this is what God is calling me into in my personal relationship with him.
Yeah.
Out of which I think other people can benefit from hearing the stories of who God is in my life, what he's invited me into, what that's looked like. And there is comfort in knowing that you're not alone on this journey and God's not asking you to do something crazy. And the rest of us, he's just saying, hang in there, right? He asks all of us to do things that from the world's perspective looks crazy. And so there is comfort in knowing you're not on this journey by yourself, that there's other people who have gone down this road and are facing their own unique sort of crisis of belief moments.
Right. I'll just throw it in there. And we've talked that I believe right now is a time where God is waking people up and he's bringing people to truth. And it's beautiful.
You had asked about earlier, how am I different? How is my family different as a result of walking this way?
Yeah.
And I won't steal all of the thunder of my son's testimony, but I will tell you, just to encourage others that might be watching this, my son was raised in the church too. Like we did that. We had our kids in church from a very young age, and Blaine was seeking truth. All right, I think we're being lied to just in the world in general, whether it's politics or healthcare or, you name it. And this isn't some tin hat conspiracy theory kind of thing. It's just he was in search of the truth. He went in search of the truth. And that was his question. I just want to know what's true. I just want to know what's true. And he didn't go through the Bible to find truth. He didn't go through Christian literature to find truth. He just started searching online. What's really true? What are they hiding from us? What are we being lied to about? I just want to know the truth.
Yeah.
And his pursuit of the truth led him directly to Jesus. And it's the most incredible testimony, most incredible story. His life is radically different than it was 2 years ago. And he's pursuing Jesus, and he's walking that out. And it's the same sort of thing. God, this is just you and I. This is just you and I. I need you to help me understand you and I. And then as he bumps into other people throughout the course of his day, he's spilling Jesus on all of those people. He's not trying to evangelize. He's not standing on a corner Bible thumping and telling people they're dying and going to hell. He's not grabbing them and telling them they have to go to church and sit next to him on Sunday morning. Like, it doesn't look like that. It looks like a guy who is taking time to hear God speak truth to him. And then as he goes throughout his day, God is giving opportunity for him to testify about that encounter.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Man, that's a whole lot less stressful. It's a whole lot less uncomfortable when I can just sit down with somebody and tell them, this is what's true of me. I don't care whether you believe it or not. I'm not suggesting that your life is going to look just like my life is looking, but this is what it's looked like for me. And I'm forever changed because of it. And so, as it relates to this platform and Saved and Confused, And that even that name, man, I prayed recently, God, will you please change that name? Like I'm going to get so much hate over Saved and Confused. And, religious people are not going to like that at all because you're not the author of confusion. Like I can already hear all of the conversation around where this is coming from. And the sense that I get about Saved and Confused is it's your eternity. Once you've received Jesus, your eternity is settled. You're saved.
Correct. Yeah.
But then you're called to walk out this life of faith. And brother, that's confusing because the world tells you got to do it like this. It's got to look like this. And you got to work like it's up to you and trust like it's up to him. That's a confusing message when I open my Bible and I see where God comes to Abraham and says, hey, I want you to move. I just want you to pack up and move. Okay, Lord, where am I going? Well, I'll let you know when you get there. So just head south.
Yeah.
What? Head south. How long are we going to be walking? Yeah, I'll let you know when you get there, And so Sarah came with him and all of the people that worked with him and all of the
animals
and
they had stuff.
Everything. They packed up a wagon train like the pioneers in America, headed west, young man,
Right.
He just showed him a direction. He said, just go and I'll tell you when you get there.
Right.
Man, that's faith. That's faith to be able to say, okay, I trust you, and if you look in that hall of faith that we've referenced a couple of times, the very first mention of Abraham wasn't because he laid Isaac on the altar. It was because he trusted God when he said, just go and I'll show you.
Exactly.
And he just turned and walked. It doesn't make sense. Nobody would do that. That's not how it was done back in their day. You owned land. You stayed on that land. You raised generation after generation after generation on that land,
Exactly. Yeah.
So, faith is awfully uncomfortable at times, but I think it's the only way to live the life that God created us to live.
Yeah.
And it will be full of adventure and mystery, and it will be the most fulfilling life you could ever live because it's what you were designed for. You were specifically created for a specific purpose and a specific time and a specific geography. Like none of that is chance. And as we lean into, okay, Lord, I just trust you and I'm just going to walk this out because I believe this is what you're saying to me and you're confirming it. I'm writing it down in my journal and my wife's writing down in her journal. We haven't talked about it, but you're saying the same thing to both of us. We go to church and we sit down and the message on Sunday morning is exactly what we've been hearing from you all week long. And it's another confirmation. And like he confirms stuff to us a million different ways.
Right.
And every time he does, we're just able to look at each other and go, you can't make this up. You cannot make this up. There's no way this is coincidence or happenstance or whatever you want to call it. It just happens way too regularly for us. And so, it's still a challenge to surrender to that. It's still a challenge to let your actions be consistent with what you say you believe. That's where the heavy lifting happens. And he's faithful to give you the energy and the motivation and the encouragement to do that heavy lifting. But there's, this isn't a walk for wimps. It's going to challenge you to the very core of who you are. And that doesn't have to look like finances for you. That's sort of been our thing, is trusting God in the area of finances. That's been a big one for us.
Sure.
But that doesn't have to be everybody's story. But there's an idol between you and God right now that he wants to put his finger on and identify for you and ask you to trust him. And so, I don't know, man, any other is there anything else that I didn't cover or any questions that you've got?
No, I was going to ask you the same thing. Is there anything else you want to covered a lot of stuff? And
this has been a great conversation. Yeah, great conversation. And I just want to say for the purposes of recording this and for other people that are going to hear this down the road, I encourage conversation around this stuff. I am available for conversation around this stuff. If you are a friend of mine on Facebook, there's a pretty good chance you've got contact information for me. If not, you can direct message me through Facebook. As this podcast grows, I believe it will grow. As this podcast grows, I may not always be available to do sort of the one-on-one conversations as much as I'm available right now, but we'll figure out how to make that a part of, what we do going forward. But I encourage you, if any of this has been encouraging to you, if you have questions about any of this, if there's stuff you want to talk about, maybe I don't agree with, maybe you don't agree with me or some of this. Listen, I'm open to discuss it and have conversation with you. I am not coming to you as an expert. I'm not coming to you telling you what you ought to do, what you ought to believe, who you ought to talk to, what direction you ought to go. I'm not telling you to quit your job. I'm just telling you what my story was. And the specifics around my story will be probably widely different than the specifics of your story, but the theme will always be giving up control in favor of complete and utter dependency on Jesus for every direction and every step of the way. I think that's what he's calling us to do. I think it's so much that I'm putting my family in a position where that has to be true. And so I would also ask, just again, for the purposes of podcast and recording, share this with as many people as you know. If there's anybody that comes to mind for you that, may benefit from hearing this conversation or future conversations along the same lines, let them know that it's out there. Once I post this one, we're gonna post every week, and so be looking for weekly episodes of this podcast. We're just going to talk about faith and hearing from God and being honest with God and what that looks like in the lives of different people within the faith community. And so I think it's going to be a source of really good encouragement, and it's probably going to be challenging to you at times as well. But I think that's what this is about. And it's also a space where you can ask questions and feel safe, feel like you're in a safe environment, because nobody's here to judge you or point you to any other direction except to Jesus. So thanks for tuning in. If you've made it this far, give us some comments back. Let us know what you thought of the broadcast today. And as always, I pray a blessing over every one of you. And I'm thankful that you've tuned in. May God bless you and keep you and just make himself evident in your life. This is available to every one of us. And so we're just grateful for the opportunity to be here and to share in what he's doing, and just pray great things for you guys. Until next time, we'll see you in a week.